So we are in our sixth time together. Can you believe that? And we have been doing, as you know, a time with theology, and then the alternating month we've been doing something with regard to biblical masculinity with this book, Richard Phillips. And so, yeah, I'm not plagiarizing because I'm just telling you right off that a lot of this is regurgitation from the chapter that you read, with a few of my own thoughts here and there, and some scripture that he didn't mention. But yeah, this would be our sixth time with chapter 3 in this book for your orientation purposes. So all of you read the chapter ahead of time, I know. So what did you think of Phillips's opinion on page 23, where and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says that a man can get away with a lot of things, but one thing he will never get away with is not working. Yeah? Does that sound about right? I think throughout most time and cultures, and our culture, through all the different epochs that we've gone through, that's been solidly true forever. Paul tells us, of course, that the one that does not work shall not eat. That's in 2 Thessalonians. To Timothy, he says, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Basically, we're supposed to work whether we find it particularly fulfilling or not. I know in the age we live, we always talk about people finding their happy place and the thing that provides fulfillment and all that, and that's great. But ultimately, we're called to work even if the work isn't glamorous. And he uses the example of like a trash hauler. And I think that's a good one because you can put in an honest day's work. It's the least glamorous profession pretty much that a person can do, but you can honor God in that. Most men have experienced the good feeling of a job well done, he says, and there is satisfaction in our work, oddly enough. Men become workaholics because on some level, work can become quite attractive, can't it? Mm-hmm. Ecclesiastes says, what gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business or busyness that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So that's implying that work is good and that's from God. And even though there's this futility in there, there's also almost this little piece of our DNA that we recognize, and that kind of lights up certain things in us. God created work before the fall, which suggests work changed after the fall, but the fact that he created it before the fall and then that it actually gets built into the curse kind of says something, doesn't it? That maybe that's kind of an important thing. The fall brings a lot of pain and futility. You think about it, he says, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to earn your bread. He says the ground's going to yield thorns and thistles. And isn't that pretty much a description of work? Like, you think about it, like you go after it, it does bring you some pleasure, there is some satisfaction, yet the whole time you're doing it, it's also painful, and it costs you to put the time and the effort in. It's exhausting, and then you do something and it doesn't work, or your tool breaks, or you find yourself doing the exact same job a month later that you thought was going to last 5 years or whatever. There's this sort of futility. One of the messages that Hollywood puts out about work and men is, you've heard the term trope, which is a cliche in film terms. How many have seen this like in about every TV show and every movie you've ever seen? Dad is a bad dad. Why is he a bad dad? Because he missed a baseball game because he had to work. And how dare he have these horrible priorities that prevent dad from being at the baseball game or the recital or whatever it might be. Now, I'm not saying that dads should just miss every baseball game. That would be the flip side of it, and that'd be wrong, but it's not really true. I mean, men are doing a good thing if they're working for their family. And if you're really working for your family, there are a lot of jobs that are going to take you out of commission. You're not going to be able to be there. He mentions that even in heaven or in the age to come, men will still be working, and that may well be true. How many have thought about that in the parable of the talents? There is a danger if you take a parable and you squeeze too much out of it. Like, parables are supposed to have like one or two main points, and then you don't read something into every single detail. But in the parable of the talents, and here's where it's like, well, maybe this is what it's saying. In Luke, he talks about how he gives them cities to be in charge of. as a reward. So the guy that earned more, did more with what he was given, was put in charge of 10 cities and so on and so forth. And that's a job. Like, that's not a reward in the sense that we think about a reward. It's not a trip to Disneyland. It's here. You can work more. Here's a place for you. And we would assume, because it's the age to come, because it's the new heaven, the new earth, that there would be no futility to the work. It would be satisfying, and it wouldn't be like breaking us, but it would be good. So let's talk about some biblical standards that he mentions, 5 criteria when you think about choosing your work. Does it glorify God? And this is in the book, if you can see it in the headings there. Does it glorify God? Does it benefit my fellow man? Do I consider myself called to this work, or can I at least do it well and find enjoyment in that? That's all one point. Does it provide for material needs? Does it permit me to lead a godly and balanced life? So let me just say a couple things about each one of those. We'll speed through this, but does it glorify God? That's an important question in everything we do. Chief end of man, right? Westminster Catechism. Glorify God, enjoy Him forever. Paul says, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And I don't think I need to expand on this a lot to say that anything you do, if you do it well, could reasonably be said to glorify God, unless, of course, you're a gangster or something like that. And even though you might be a very, very good gangster, that probably doesn't glorify God, in most circumstances at least. But yeah, for the most part, almost any job done well can please God, because it draws attention to, if you're a Christian, you go by the name of Christ, people see what you're doing and they go, wow, Christians work hard. Christians do good work even when people aren't watching. Does it benefit my fellow man? And I thought about that when I read it. I thought, well, honestly, in a free market society, any and every job pretty much benefits someone, doesn't it? Like, it's very hard to have a job unless, I almost said something. You could theoretically have a political job that benefits no one and you're getting paid good money for it. But at least the idea of a political job would be that you're doing a whole lot of good for a lot of people, and you might be able to slack on that. But yeah, if it doesn't matter what kind of widget you're making or selling, or how you're serving other people with what you're doing, there's some benefit. Whether you're a doctor, that's easy, right? Oh yeah, they serve people. But you could be a sunglasses salesman in a mall, just to pick a really super weird random job out of nowhere. Hi, Garrett. You could do something like that. I mean, people need sunglasses. They wouldn't come and buy Oakleys if they didn't appreciate that and feel like there was some gain from having a pair of those. I had a friend once who worked, and I don't know the name of these it's almost like the payday loan place, but a little different than that. It was one of these last resort loan kind of deals where people could come in. They'd always have to have collateral. Like, there were no non-collateralized loans. And the interest was like pretty much like where a credit card goes to. Like, it was super high interest rate. And I started thinking he was a little involved in he was a Christian guy. And I thought, yeah, I at some point, we were such good friends. I just looked at him one day. I'm like, do you ever feel like you're doing something kind of scummy with this job? Like, you're taking advantage of people, aren't you? I mean, how do you as a Christian reconcile that? And he said, wait. Didn't get offended, but he says, listen, by the time people come to us, we're the last bank that will loan them any money. There's no one else in the world, including their family, that will loan them money. They have 0 credit scores. They know this is their only chance to borrow money. So if they come in and they put something up as collateral, a car, a boat, whatever, an old shotgun or something, they understand. And they generally, you'd be surprised, he said, they're pretty good at making their payments because they've hit the absolute bottom. And he said, if we weren't here, what would they do? And I thought, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. Why would you give them a low interest rate and give them a uncollateralized loan, or whatever you call it, unsecured loan? You wouldn't. And so, yeah, even something like that looks a little like, payday loan places, like, oh, they take advantage of the poor. The poor use them for a reason. Like, they're getting something out of it.
I don't know, my job might not be beneficial.
Yeah, we're not so sure about yours.
I installed a meter, so I'm making you pay.
Yeah. Yeah, but we are getting electricity out of the deal. That's a big one. We don't like to. Every time the electricity goes off, we suddenly really appreciate all the people that work for the. Next one, do I consider myself called to this work, or can I at least do it well and find enjoyment in it? And this might seem strange at first to talk about feeling called to a secular job, because we tend to put them in these two separate categories. But if you think about it, really we're all working within the providential sovereign purposes of God for our life. And God does have a different, maybe it's a different kind of call, but there is a call. It's funny, I'd already prepared this, and last night Debbie and I were watching a show called So Help Me Todd. Have any of you seen it? It's just a goofy little drama thing, dramedy. Anyway, this guy's a private investigator, and he's kind of a kid that failure to launch sort of deal. And his mother, out of nowhere, just says in the script last night, she says, "Well, Todd has found his calling as a private investigator." Now think about that word. You found your calling. Who's calling? Think about the word vocation. We have vocation schools and vocational counseling and all that. What does the word vocation mean? It's the Latin, comes from the Latin to call. And so, yeah, we do have a calling. And I don't think we mean by that we're looking for some mystical experience where God whispers in the night, "Hey, I want you in retail sales, preferably men's clothing, but I would accept." Now, I mean, that's not what we're talking about. What we're saying is that God has gifted you with certain skills and certain personality type and a whole slew of things coming together in his providence. And then out of that, he leads you to certain kinds of work, at least for certain times in your life. And that should be regarded as from God and therefore a vocation. Does it provide for material needs? This is an interesting one, but I think it's important to say, and that is, your work should provide enough for you to live on. You should earn enough to take care of your needs. If you're a single person, if you have a family, you should be able to provide for them through that. And if it doesn't pay the bills, a person should think twice, or at least be looking to expand their horizons, because otherwise you're not really fulfilling your needs. Paul says this. He says, "Were you a bondservant when called?" He says, "Do not be concerned about it." Then he immediately says, "But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself to the opportunity." So you might say, are you trapped in a dead-end job that's not meeting your needs or the needs of your family, and you're spending most of your time like trying to beg for bread? Well, God can take care of you, and he can make you content when you have very little. But if you can get out of that, if you're the head of the home and you can do better, you should probably do better. And the scripture also says, "You shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wage." And I don't think that means that we have to go find the highest paying job for our career in the whole country or world. But I think it's saying, if you're a Christian and you're like, "Oh, well, I don't want to be greedy." Well, if you're literally not making ends meet as the head of the home, you should be thinking about how do I fix that? Does it permit me to lead a godly and balanced life? This is important. I've known guys that call themselves Christians. I don't know. You don't know because the fruit doesn't seem to be there. Where you find out that the reason they're never in church is because they're holding down 3 different jobs, and their wife's working. And okay, you really can't make it any other way. What you really start to realize is they're just getting into a place where things matter more to them than their spiritual lives. And you think about what Jesus said. He said, "What good is it if you gain the world and lose your soul?" But as men, we have another layer to that. It's not just our own souls we're concerned with. I've thrown this statistic out. It's actually, I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but it's a generalization, and I could look up the statistic, but I just didn't. They say that they've polled people, and generally speaking, if a woman goes to church Sunday after Sunday, but her husband doesn't, and her children see that, it has almost no effect on keeping them in the church, that their children will go away from the faith, even though she was a consistent example, has almost no effect. Whereas if the husband, the father, if the kids see him in church every week, even if the wife's not there, in fact, I think, as I recall the statistic, if the wife doesn't come and he still comes, it's actually even like a few percentage points higher in terms of the influence on the children for continuing in the faith and staying involved in the church. So what does that say? Like if a man says, well, I've got to hold down 3 jobs so my kids can all have braces and go to Disney World, what happens if they lose their faith? What happens if they never come to Christ because they didn't see that importance in you? Yeah, we should, whatever we're working at, it ought to allow us to live at least a godly, balanced life. Phillips then talks about seasons of work, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. I don't know exactly from the scripture where we would take that, except maybe Ecclesiastes, that there's a time for everything. But you shouldn't get hung up, I think, as a man, if your job takes you along different paths at different points in your life. Like he was a tank commander and taught at West Point and then ends up as a pastor. Like God has different times and different places. And that's, some people, Don, you're probably one of those guys that had a more straight path. I mean, you pretty much knew, you went after the medical thing pretty early and saw it through and stayed in. I mean, I know you had some shifting, but you basically have stayed in that one path for a lot of years, right?
Well, I started out to be a nuclear physicist.
Right. And then, yes, but I mean, within, yeah. But I mean, you didn't start the first 10 years of your life being a lawyer and then 10 years being a doctor and 10 years being a baker. I mean, you kind of stayed, once you got your career, you kind of stayed with it, right?
Yeah, but the path was also pretty well defined. I mean, society had a structure.
Yeah.
If you were
exactly.
doing this, you had to be licensed. You had to have this type of education, whereas other people may have a different.
Yeah. I mean, some of us have I think that's such a blessing for some people that they find their path early and they're just like on it. And yeah, but for a lot of you, I guess he's just saying there can be seasons of work, and it's not like you don't have to sit there and fret necessarily. Oh, I can't be in God's will because I haven't found that one single thing that's going to hold me all the way through.
Can I make one comment?
Sure, one comment.
Back 50-some years later, I look back and think how much of it I didn't do.
Yeah.
But it's all God's thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, that would be the flip side.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could think of the paths not taken.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. I got you.
It wasn't easy, but it happened.
Right. Okay, so one of the last principles here, he's talking about working just to please the Lord. Our Christian lives are not made up of the spiritual things we do on Sunday and then the rest of our life, which has no spiritual emphasis or meaning. Rather, everything we live, and this is borrowing from R.C. Sproul, not the book, but R.C. Sproul talked about our lives coram Deo, which means before the face of God. And he saw that as the central sort of thing of the Christian life, is that everything we do, whatever it is always lived knowing that God is our audience, that he's watching. We live our lives unto him. Paul says, for if we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. And whatever we're doing in our work, we should be striving just for that mindset. It's easy to not work if you don't want to. And yet, you can find that way of shirking duty. But when you live that as God is your audience, it changes, right? Paul says, whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Lastly, Phillips just goes into this thing about you're probably going to be in your work life either taking orders or giving orders, or you're both. How many would say that describes your life? You're taking orders from some places, you're giving orders to others, yeah? How many feel like you're at the bottom of the totem pole? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Colin and I, we feel that way. Yeah, in life, as we move through life, living and doing different careers and things of that nature, you'll find that, and that's a principle in Scripture, right? That we are to obey those in authority over us, and part of even honoring those above us is a way of honoring God. It sort of it's recognition God is sovereign, God's in control. We want to submit to Him, so we submit to authority, rightful authority. Honor to him to whom honor is due. At the same time, we're probably going to end up having other people that are going to take orders from us, kind of like the centurion that told Jesus, look, you can just say the word and my servant will be healed, because I know how authority works, and I give orders and people do what I say when I say it. So you just say it and it'll be fine. That's why he had great faith, or was said to have great faith. What we want to do with those that are under us, though, is serve them as we would want to be served by those over us. That is, that the way we lead them would be with a sufficient amount of firmness and gentleness that as befits the situation, but with the idea of investing in people. Like even if you're telling them what to do and you're giving them very little leeway on that, you're at least doing it so that they learn the job and that they do it well and that they grow in those things. At the end of the day, we must work in our jobs for the audience of one. People talk today about quiet quitting. Have you ever heard of that? And that's just detestable, isn't it? It's one of the most detestable things to think about, that quiet quitting is saying, well, these people pay me, but I really don't like the job. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep showing up, show up as little as I have to not get fired. And then while I'm there, do as absolutely little as I can possibly get away with without getting fired. Because I really don't like this job, and I'm just really trying to find something else. It's like, that is just such an abusive thing to do to other people. But they say it's really quite common today. We should be working as unto the Lord. And Paul says that to slaves. He's like, hey, if you're a slave, know that your work is as to the Lord. The Lord will count it in that way as well. So even the worst job you can do as unto the Lord. And ultimately, we know if we're putting in a full day's work, and we know the Lord knows that. So we should live in that coram deo kind of way. All righty, that was a fairly long one, but I will leave it to you now.